Welcome everybody to this month's vlogcast. I'm Nona Baker, an MPN patient and co-chair of MPN Voice. I am absolutely delighted to welcome Kirsty Crozier, who's an advanced nurse practitioner at the Great Western Hospital in Swindon. Kirsty has long been a supporter of MPN patients. And Kirsty, thank you. And I would really welcome you to address the MPN community on the role of an advanced nurse practitioner, because I know COVID has changed so much in the way clinics are run. And I think for any newly diagnosed patient, it would be a good idea just to get an idea of what it means coming into a clinic where there are clinical nurse specialists and advanced nurse practitioners. So perhaps you could tell us about that.
Thank you very much for inviting me and having me to speak with you. So the role of the CNS and the advanced nurse practitioner or advanced clinical practitioners is really vital, I feel, in the patient's journey. They're there for a number of different reasons. They can help with diagnosis, talking patients through what they're feeling. So for the psychological input, they can help oversee treatments. They can help make sense of what the patient's going through. And often I say the consultant is there to build the house, to give them the structure to what's happening. And then the clinical nurse specialist or advanced nurse practitioner is there to add the soft furnishings to make sense of that reality to the patient and just help guide them through what this will mean for them. And they can use that in a number of different ways, either using the knowledge and skills that they have just to support the patient through, or signposting them to different agencies such as MPN Voice for information. There are a number of different levels of clinical nurse specialists. So you'll have clinical nurse specialists who see patients at diagnosis and do a number of different roles, as I've already mentioned. Then there's advanced nurse practitioners, and often the difference there can be experience, or it can be that they prescribe and they assess patients, sometimes diagnose patients. And then advanced clinical practitioners can be pharmacists, physiotherapists, nurses, a number of paramedics, a number of different allied healthcare professionals who work at almost like a staff grade level and diagnose, assess patients. Mostly they're educated to master's levels or have done some sort of accreditation as advanced practitioners. So there's varying degrees of specialists that patients will meet. I, for one, think it's vital that patients meet a specialist just to help them make sense of the diagnosis and to guide them in the right way for information that they may need.
That sounds a really comprehensive overview. Thank you, Kirsty. Just tell me, how many hospitals roughly in the UK have advanced nurse practitioners as part of their team and clinical nurse specialists? Is it something that most patients will find in their hospitals?
Sadly not. And I feel I was very fortunate for a long time when I worked in the Churchill with Prof. Adam Mead to be able to specialise and review just myeloid patients. Until that point, I'd had a lot of haematology experience, but as with many hospitals, you will have a haematology CNS or a haematology ANP, but they don't subspecialise within haematology. It is just haematology, so you're covering a little bit of everything, and actually you're spread relatively thin. Some may argue with that, whereby you're covering a lot of the big diagnoses, and sadly things like MPN patients, CML patients, your MDS patients, they may then be managed through different clinics, more medically managed. So again, it's very variable as to the access to a haematology nurse, and it's variable as to their knowledge within different subspecialities of haematology.
I think that's again really valid and an important thing. But if patients don't have that level of support that your patients are lucky enough to have, that's the time to contact NPN Voice, where we can help with buddies, and we can help also support patients through the forums. You know, we're doing more and more of both online forums, and Maz and I next week are doing our first face-to-face for 2 whole years.
Wow.
And we're doing a forum in Cork in Ireland on Saturday week, which is just amazing.
It's
but
so
I think
important. It's just because a lot of times when people get this sort of diagnosis, because traditionally they have been given a diagnosis, they have been told that it's either a watch and wait or watch and worry, depending on how you look at it, or some treatment is started. But then it's straight to a clinic, and it's different to having an acute diagnosis, whereby it feels as though you're almost enveloped with information, whereas some of the chronic conditions are very much awash at sea without that information and where to look. So having sites such as NPN Voice, there's so many other sites as well that are really useful for blood cancer patients, is vital to patients, because they fill that gap that we can't reach. Because with best will in the world, I wasn't able to reach all of the patients that I encountered in Oxford. So there has to be something else there. And I am so grateful that there are websites like NPN Voice out there to just direct patients with good information, and also let them know that they're not alone in this, that there are other people out there with a similar diagnosis going through the same thing.
You see, I think also one of the real pluses, the hospital where I'm treated has an advanced nurse practitioner and CNSs, that in between appointments with the consultant, you know, one can email the CNS, and if there's a little worry or a problem, you know, they'll come straight back. And I think that's a huge comfort to a lot of patients.
I think it is, because otherwise, if you don't have the opportunity to ask a question, often it becomes a mountain in your head and you worry about it. Whereas if you know that just sending off a little email or being able to leave a message, and I say that to a lot of the patients that I encounter, if you have a question, just ask it. Just either email in or phone and leave a message. It's not urgent, but I was thinking about this, and then we would try and get back. COVID has brought a very different way to how we work. And we've really had to adapt to that. So I think sometimes it's a little bit of expectation management of patients and us as to how quickly we can get back to people. But it's just, I think just knowing that the patient can contact somebody and that somebody will get back to them is a relief. And again, a bit of belonging. There's a bit of continuity for the patient, because they know that somebody will give them information or guide them as to the correct thing to do. And I think if I were a patient, I would be reassured by that. And most patients don't abuse that, if that makes sense. They don't use it a lot. A lot of patients are very good at self-managing, but sometimes, and initially, you just need to be able to ask questions. Is this normal? Is this something I should be worried about? Until they're able to gauge how this chronic condition becomes part of them.
That's really helpful. And I think if you don't have that support system in the hospital where you're treated, perhaps one of the things I learned in the early days is to go with a list of questions written down in a book. And preferably, and now I think it's becoming easier, to take somebody with you. I know it's been very difficult through COVID, but have that second pair of ears.
Yeah.
Because quite often as a patient, you only hear what you think are the negative things, not always the positive things. Are there any other tips you can give patients who don't have the facilities like you have in your hospital?
Yeah, I think it's a bit about looking for the information. And a lot of people, we all want information in different ways and at different times. I'm a very visual person, so if you give me a lot of written information, I probably won't read it. But if you let me process things and then just guide me as to where I need to look, I find that useful. I can then at my own pace look to see what I need to know. And it's where to look for that need to know stuff. So it's been able to highlight very quickly where they should go. And I think that's a difficulty because, again, in this era, we have the internet, which is a wonderful resource, but it's also a very scary resource. And you can find a lot of information out there that maybe doesn't apply to how we manage patients within the UK. So one of my top tips is definitely using your appointment to the full potential. So writing things down, because if anybody, I assume everybody's like me and I forget as soon as I go into a clinic appointment, I forget what I want to know or what I wanted to ask. And then you lose that opportunity to make the most of it. So definitely having things written down. And it's asking, is there somewhere I can look for more information? What are good websites? Is there other patients that I could speak to? And it's maybe being able to prioritize. And I don't know that you could do that straight away. I think that almost needs to come a couple of appointments later. And even for patients who have been diagnosed for a long time, we have peaks in our lives where things aren't maybe as good, where we maybe become unwell and we have to manage that. So they have to have that flexibility to be able to know that they can get in touch with somebody or where to look for the information. And as I said, COVID has really changed how we manage patients. And I think in some ways for good, in some ways for bad. I think a lot of patients, when I was working in Oxford for a long time, we did telephone calls with patients and we had email communications established. So prior to COVID, we were very well set up for managing our patients that way. So maybe annual reviews or 18-month reviews. And in the meantime, we had calls to them or emails to them, depending on what suited. So when COVID hit, it wasn't too much of a change for that group of patients, whereas I think for other patients it's come as a dramatic change. And I like telephone calls for MPN patients because actually we can assess them. Patients are very much able to update us on their symptoms that they're having. I think if that's not been your norm, it wasn't a nice change. So if you were used to coming up to clinic every so often, having that taken away from you is not nice. Whereas our patients, we had a nice gradual transition from face-to-face or letters to a telephone clinic, and COVID introduced this overnight change. And I think we need to find a nice hybrid approach where it's somewhere in between, where patients are able to speak to the clinician if they don't have a specialist nurse involved, and be able to have those questions answered, as well as have monitoring and their symptoms assessed, so that we know the impact that their diagnosis is having on them.
And I think that's incredibly helpful. And the other thing that is helpful, and I don't know if you have one, a CNS-led support group within your hospital. I think that I know that patients have found those very helpful in linking up with other patients. Do you have one?
We did actually. We had a couple of support groups run. We had a general haematology patient group, and then we had specific groups. But what we found was, I don't know if anybody knows Oxford, but to get the times and things set up, it was particularly difficult because just geographically having the right place, having the right area, spaces at a premium. So it turned out to be quite tricky. We did have quite a few MPN patients that came along to the meetings to begin with, but again, COVID put paid to that, and actually following on from that, it went to a lot of virtual meetings, and again that allowed us to access such brilliant webinars that were available throughout COVID, and they've started to become more popular, so where patients can get that information without having to leave their home. And I think that would be again a good way going forward for some of the patients to be able to link in through the like this sort of meeting, a virtual meeting. But I think there's a real I used to really like my face-to-face meetings with the patient groups, because there was that real sense of camaraderie between the patients, because they all had this condition, regardless of the diagnosis, because there's such a variability between diagnosis, but they had this sense of kinship, and that they all knew what they were going through. They were able to discuss their fatigue and what it felt like, whereas I can only guess at what it feels like. So I do think there's something really valuable about face-to-face meetings, and being able to just have a chat with somebody that's going through the exact same thing as you. So I would hope that we don't lose that.
I wholeheartedly agree with that. And both Maz and I find the face-to-face forums that we do rewarding in so many ways, because quite often you see very nervous, newly diagnosed patients coming in, getting a massive amount of reassurance from fellow patients in the breakout groups and but just having a cup of tea over a cup of tea. But also from the talks that clinical nurse specialists and the doctors and even patient talks give, and I think there's room for a hybrid of these. I don't know what you think, because our plans this year are definitely to be face to face as much as we can, but also continuing doing our online forums for those people that can't travel and can't get to see us. So, but Kirsty, I'd love to ask you a question. Where would you like to see your roles evolve in the next 5 years? Where do you see the future?
Oh, that's a good question. I would love to see more specialist nurses, whether it's CNSs, advanced nurse practitioners, advanced clinical practitioners, in a lot more of the hospitals, because we've already proven that we can make a difference to patient outcomes, that we can delay or we can stop admissions when we're involved in patients' care, and just that whole transition through treatment or through diagnosis is just made easier. So I would love for there to be specialist nurses in every hospital for every single haematology condition. I would also like to move with the times a little bit, and I love all of the digital technology, even though I'm a bit of a technophobe, but I just would love for patients to be able to interact with us in a way that NHS systems maybe can't do very effectively. So I'm a fan of portals. I think since I've been helping to manage MPN patients, I am very fascinated by the symptoms, by the fact that your bloods can look okay on paper, but actually you can still have really exhausting and life-impacting symptoms. So being able to look at those symptoms along with your bloods and have that nice holistic picture of what's happening with patients, and then look at how best we can manage patients or help with symptoms. I think for a long time in haematology, we were very focused on blood results. And if your blood results are okay, that's fine. And we're now moving into this, I think, a really good era where actually it's all about what the patient is experiencing, and your blood results may be okay, but actually you're still having symptoms, and how can we best manage that? And it's what I'm looking to do my professional doctorate in, is the symptoms and how we can manage patients who have chronic conditions or hematological conditions, and how we can support patients and enable them to help manage their symptoms so that they can live with these diseases for longer, but know what to do about their fatigue, know about what to do about their itch, and so that we almost have information to hand about how best to manage them. So I would love a portal where patients can put their symptoms in, so that when we review them, we already have these symptoms. And there are things out there that you can do it. There's the MPN10, which is fabulous, but there's not a way that it can interact with me very easily without it being either paper-based or scanned into the system. Whereas I would like to be able to have a more interactive field whereby patients can put their symptoms in, and if something alerts, we can almost deal with it straight away, and then it just feels as though we are doing things in real time rather than relying on information that's maybe happened in the past. So I would like to be able to do that. And again, I think just having more forums where patients are involved, where patients are directing us on what works for them, what trials they would like to see, what trials they would like to get involved in, so that we can then keep pushing forward research. Again, I was lucky enough to work with Professor Adam Mead in Oxford, and he had so many trials open for patients, but often that would mean traveling quite far. And so it would be, how do we then make them more accessible to lots more patients so that we're getting more information and potentially a little bit quicker? So there's lots of things I would like to do, I guess.
I completely agree with you, and I think it's very much the ambition of MPN Voice to have an app, a symptom tracking app. You know, the future is bright, and I think that overcoming the technical problems is a challenge for us all, as we've had this morning. But Kirsty, thank you so much, because I think, you know, this is so helpful for patients to hear. And I'm really, really grateful for your contribution this morning. And really look forward to having a face-to-face forum done in Swindon, which again was thwarted by COVID last time.
It was, yes. We will do that, yes.
Kirsty, thank you. And, you know, on behalf of all the MPN community, we value the work that the advanced nurse specialists and the clinical nurse specialists continue to evolve in helping patients. Thank you.
Thank you for having me, and thank you for all the work that you do, because without you, there would be such a big gap for patients and they would be lost. So you just help fill some of those gaps that are there.
Thank you, Kirsty.